Okay, well, first start with your name and where you're from.
My name's Ellen Caston Brewer. I'm from Jenkinsburg, Georgia, which is where I was born and raised. And then I moved to Jackson, and I have been here ever since. I'm 77 years old.
Okay. Sorry. What was it like growing up in the 50s and 60s?
Uh, totally different from what it is now. Um, I was raised in a small town with dirt roads. My daddy raised hunting dogs. My mother had peacocks. And peacocks and hunting dogs in the same yard don't go together real well. But I was my daddy's little boy. I was never a fancy little girl, except on Easter Sunday when my mother made me dress up in little dresses and crinolines and umbrellas and little white gloves and little Mary Janes. And that was about the only time I was ever really girlish. My daddy would throw me and the dogs in the back of the pickup truck from the time I was old enough to walk, really. And we'd go out in the woods and we'd hunt and go to rabbit boxes, and we'd go out to the lake and fish. He taught me how to swim when I was maybe 4 years old. He threw me in the lake and said, "Come on back." And I got back. Let's see. We had a bicycle. I had a couple of girlfriends that lived where I lived, and my two boy cousins lived up the street. And during the summer, we left pretty much at daybreak, took a sack lunch, got on our bicycles, and didn't come home until it got dark. And if we needed anything while we were gone, we just stopped at somebody's house. We knew everybody knew us. If we got a skinned knee, we'd stop at the first house, they'd fix it, give us a piece of cake, and send us on our way. It was a wonderful childhood. Totally unlike what it is now, where you're afraid to let your children out of your sight. What else? What else do you need to know?
Move on to the next question if you want.
All right, that's pretty much what it was like growing up. It's just totally different.
Yeah.
I had we had a black and white television.
Yeah.
And came on with the test pattern first thing in the morning and went off at 10 o'clock at night.
Well, you've experienced a lot of technological changes. What are some of the biggest ones you've experienced throughout your lifetime?
I got a transistor radio for my 13th birthday in 1960. I thought I had died and gone to heaven. None of my friends had a transistor radio. It had only been out a few years, and I think I remember my mother saying it cost $15, which in 1960 was a lot of money. I had a little record player that played 45s. And then I think when I was 16, I got a little bitty portable television with rabbit ears. And I mean, those were just big things. It was just big things. Technology, the biggest technology growing up was Sputnik.
Was what?
Sputnik.
What's that?
It was the first orbital satellite. The Russians put it out in 1954, 55. We were all terrified.
How come?
We thought it was going to kill us all. And then shortly thereafter, I think in 1957, I think the United States put up one. The Russians always seemed to be a step ahead of us.
Yeah.
Until JFK came along. And he was determined he was going to get to the moon before they did. So technology is pretty much like what my daddy said. He grew up with, he was born in 1907, and he grew up with horse and buggies and wagons and cars, but very few of them.
Yeah.
just the technology in my lifetime has just exploded, and I'm behind.
Yeah.
I've been behind ever since the first computer came out, and both of my children took to it like ducks to water,
Mm-hmm.
and can pretty much do anything they want to. And me, I'm still hunting and pecking.
Yeah.
So technology has been a huge advancement
Mm-hmm.
in my lifetime.
What were some hobbies and activities you did when you were younger with your friends?
We rode our bicycles.
Mm-hmm.
We went fishing in the creeks and caught tadpoles and just, things like that. Went swimming in the lake. When I was in high school, I was in a glee club. That was probably my biggest activity, other than just clubs that we had at school.
Mm-hmm.
We had a state park in the county where I lived, Indian Springs, oldest state park in the nation. And it had an Olympic-sized swimming pool and a bowling alley and some things like that. And that was pretty much what we all did when we were teenagers and could drive. Of course, we all drove our cars around the county when we were 13, 14 years old,
Is that how you learned to drive?
No, I learned how to drive. My granddaddy taught me how to drive when I was 8 years old on a tractor. And I used to lean up against the back of the seat in his old pickup truck, ones with the gear shift in the floor, and the starter was a button on the floor, and I couldn't change gears, so I would putter through the pasture in the truck with him on the back throwing hay out to the cows. And that's pretty much how I learned how to drive. And then when I needed to learn how to change gears, my daddy put me in his old pickup truck, 3-speed on the column. The gears weren't synchronized, so every time I changed gears, they ground. And set me off down the dirt road and told me to make left-hand turns and come back home. It was a big square, about 3 miles. He said, if you're not back in 30 minutes, I'll come looking for you. And by the time I got back to the house, I knew how to operate a clutch and a gear shift. What else?
What were your parents like? What were they?
Strict.
Strict, yeah.
My daddy never spanked me, but one time, I was about 5 years old. There was a store up the street that sold some candy, and I wanted some, and he wouldn't give me any money. So he emptied his pockets out on the counter, and I took a nickel and went to the store and bought a little sack full of candy. And he met me half the way home with a switch. And he switched me all the way back to the store, made me return the candy, get my nickel back, and then he switched me all the way home and told me how disappointed in me he was. And that's when I realized stealing was not the best thing to do. Mother would spank me with a hairbrush if I really did something egregious. Like I told a lie or something like that, and I learned real quick lying doesn't pay either. And that's pretty much it. They were really strict.
You have any unforgettable stories of either of your parents?
That one about my daddy, yes, about the switching.
Yeah.
Other than the fact that my daddy worked a lot, 60, 70, 80 hours a week most of the time. But he always made time when there was a new movie at the drive-in theater up the road to come home, and we'd go to the movies and watch all the new westerns, and then he'd come back home and go back to work. What else?
What was it like growing up around a restaurant business?
Entertaining at times, and at other times it was dreadful.
I can imagine. Did he have you working up at Fresh Air?
No, not really working, but I was there on the weekends. My mother worked on the weekends, and I was always with them.
Mm-hmm.
And the old veterinarian that actually started Fresh Air Barbecue
Mm-hmm.
lived up the road about a mile.
Yeah.
And he and his brother were friends of mine growing up. And I would go up there a lot of Sunday afternoons and spend Sunday afternoon with them, walk around in the pasture. He raised goats and rabbits. And one Sunday afternoon, I think it was a Sunday, I can't remember exactly, but anyway, he gave me a little bitty goat. I thought it was the cutest thing I'd ever seen. It was black. And he gave it to me and I took it home. And when my mother saw it, she had what the Southerners call a hissy fit.
Mm-hmm.
And get that goat out of my house and take it back where you got it. That's one of the few times I ever really saw her angry.
Mm.
And she was really upset about that little goat. Stories about them. My mother was a good person.
Mm-hmm.
She, if people were, when they died, people she knew, if they were too poor to mark their graves, she would do it. She fed, I don't know how many people on Thanksgiving and Christmas. We spent probably 2 hours taking plates to people after we ate. This is hard.
I don't know.
My daddy's been dead since 96 and I still miss him every day. My mother, I don't so much because she was so sick before she died.
Mm-hmm.
That it felt like a blessing. What's the next one?
Let's see. What was it like raising Dad?
I was 19 the day after he was born.
Mm-hmm. So
I was technically 18 when he was born. And we pretty much raised each other. I had no clue.
Mm-hmm.
He was the sweetest baby I have ever seen. He was just, he slept through the night early. He did everything early. He walked early. He talked early. He talked really early.
Mm-hmm.
He could have carried on a conversation with the President of the United States when he was 18 months old.
Checks out.
He liked big words, and he still does.
Yeah.
But he was the most stubborn human being I have ever known.
Yep.
And you could beat him to death, and it wouldn't make a bit of difference.
Mm.
And he was very difficult in school. If he loved something, he was wonderful at it. Better than anybody in the world. If he didn't like it, like math, you could just forget it. He had no use for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he's pretty much the same way now, isn't he?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
I don't think he's changed a whole lot.
No.
He's still very stubborn,
Yes.
very hard-headed,
Yep.
and very ethical.
Yeah.
That's one thing I enjoy about both of my children. They're both very ethical people. What else do you need to know about him?
What was the hardest part about? I mean, obviously you were a young mother. What was it?
A very young mother.
What was the most difficult part about being so young?
He had a milk allergy when he was born.
Mm-hmm.
And we tried goat milk, which you could get in cans at the grocery store. And he couldn't handle that either. And Enfamil had not been out very long. It was in a can. And it was $50 a month.
Mm.
And that was the only thing we could find that he could tolerate. And my husband was making $375 a month before taxes.
Mm.
$50 was our house payment. $50 was the month's groceries. We didn't have it.
Yeah.
So my daddy gave me $50 every month to buy a case of Enfamil for Michael. That was hard. It was hard for my husband to accept too, but it was necessary.
Yeah.
What was hard? Trying to make him understand that you couldn't just do English and history, and you had to do everything else too.
Yeah.
Whether you liked it or not. That was a difficult part.
Yeah.
I don't know what else was difficult.
What was it like raising two sons? Did they bicker all the time?
Yeah, pretty much. We really tried to have our youngest son sooner than we did, but it just didn't work out that way. And there was 4 years and 9 months between them. And that's really too much time. 2 years, 2.5 years is a good distance apart. But yes, they fussed with each other. Michael was a spendthrift. Chris was a saver. Michael used to borrow money from Chris. Even when he was 6 or 7 years old, he would borrow money from Chris. They were just totally different human beings.
Yeah.
It was almost like they didn't come out of the same gene pool. Chris was athletic and well-rounded. He was pretty good at everything. Michael was either excellent or terrible.
Yeah.
At everything. It's just, there was no in-between ground with him. Chris was always in the middle of everything. But when it came right down to it, they were brothers.
Yeah.
And, I could pick on him, but don't you?
Yeah.
And other than that, I really don't think they had any terrible conflicts with each other.
Yeah.
Michael wanted to sleep in the dark. Chris wanted a light on somewhere. Where when he opened his eyes, he had terrible eyesight. When he opened his eyes, he wanted to know where he was. So we had to split them up and take them out, put them in separate bedrooms after that. I guess that's pretty much what it was to raise him.
What would you say is the most important lesson you've learned in your life, and something that you live your life based on?
Something I have learned probably in the last 10 or 15 years is stuff doesn't matter. All this stuff that I have collected my whole life is not important. Important is experiences, the things you do with your children and your grandchildren. And I think that's probably the biggest lesson I've learned. Just
don't get caught up in the material things.
Don't get caught up in minutia. Yeah. Stick to what really counts.
What would you say is the most difficult obstacle that you faced and had to overcome, and how did you go about overcoming it?
I'm not sure I've overcome it. I think arthritis is the worst thing I've ever had to deal with. It's changed my life so completely that I'm still trying to deal with it. And I'm not sure I ever will completely. But that's probably the hardest thing I've ever had to deal with. It's taken my ability to travel and do a lot of things that I've enjoyed doing. And something I had planned on doing was taking all 3 of my grandchildren on a trip somewhere. And I can't do that now. Yeah, that's probably the hardest thing I've ever had to deal with.
Okay. Now, you've traveled a lot. How many countries would you say you've been to around?
59.
59? 6 continents?
Yes.
All but Antarctica?
Missed Antarctica.
Yeah.
Still have hopes, but I doubt it.
Do you have any memorable moments from your trips all over the world? Anything that really sticks out?
Lots of things. You may have to cut this out, I don't know, about the dog.
Yeah.
A friend of mine, well, 3 friends of mine, we went on a trip to Alaska. And we stopped in Juneau, and one of my friends that was my roommate at the time, I said, we'll meet on this bench when we get through with the tour we were on. And when I got back first, there was a man and his dog sitting on the bench. So I walked up to the man. I said, "Can I sit down on the bench next to your dog?" And he says, "Well, I don't know. Why don't you ask the dog?" So I looked at him and I said, "Is it all right if I sit down next to you?" And the dog laid back down on the bench. The man said, "It's okay. You can sit down." So I was talking to the man, and I love animals. And if they're anywhere around me, I've got my hands on them. So I was just petting him around the neck and rubbing him, and he threw his head, laid down on the bench, threw his head over in my lap. And I was feeling his fur and looking at his mouth and all the big teeth he had. And I thought, And the next thing I knew he had thrown his leg over in my lap. And I looked at his paw, and I looked at the man, and I said, "This is a dog, isn't it?" And he looked at me, and he said, "Some." And I said, "How much is some?" And he said, "About 10%. And I said, "Okay." I just kept on petting him, didn't say anything else. And they got up and they left. And when the dog left, he came back, licked me on the face, and walked off with the man. And when Deanna got there, she said, "Was that a dog?" And I said, "No." She said, "You've just been kissed by a wolf." I said, "Yes." That was very memorable. We were in the Atlas Mountains one time, and just in the middle of nowhere. And we had been visiting all day with this family in their family compound, and we went hunting in the side of a mountain with some of the kids digging up fossils. We actually found some. I was amazed. And that night, they invited us to have dinner with them, and their whole family lived in this compound area, and they had a place out in the field, and they had a tent there, and we sat on rugs and we ate wonderful stuff, goat and lamb and all sorts of things that they cooked on a barbecue there. And then we heard this terrible racket and men making all these wonderful noises, and the next thing we knew, about 10 men were surrounding the tent in horses. And they rode around the tent and did all of these tricks on the horses' backs and whatnot, and shooting bows and arrows. And then they got out in the field with a goat, a dead goat, and played a game that I cannot remember the name of, but it was, the goat was on the ground, and they lean off the horse, they grab the goat, they try and get to a certain end of the field with it. Meanwhile, somebody else on a horse has bucked up against that horse and grabbed the goat. And this went on for about an hour. And that was a really interesting experience. What else? The kids in a lot of countries that I went to, especially China and Japan, and if they heard you speaking English, they were just surround you, talk to me, let me practice my English, tell me what it's like to live in the United States. And I mean, just hours on end sometimes. They were just totally interested in everything that was happening in the United States, especially the children in China.
Mm-hmm.
A little boy about 2 years old taught me how to use chopsticks.
Mm-hmm.
He was eating with a pair that you cook with, were about, I don't know, this long, 18 inches, 2 feet long. And he was actually eating a bowl of soup with those chopsticks and showed Deanna and I how to eat with them. I don't know, there's just been so many things, just wonderful things. Turkey is probably one of my favorite places I've ever been.
What'd you like about Turkey?
Everything. The Blue Moss, the Hagia Sophia, the markets, the fishing boats, the cistern. I had no idea. I always wanted to go to Turkey, and I really had no idea that most of your Roman things that are left over actually happened in Turkey. There's more Roman ruins in Turkey than there are in Italy. St. Paul was in Turkey. That's where he wrote all of his letters to Ephesus and places like that. We saw the cave where he actually lived as a hermit. It's just, I don't know, I've just enjoyed meeting people, different religions. So many people want to know about your religion and they want to tell you about theirs. There's such a small factor that's crazy. I don't know any other way to put it.
Yeah.
It's just crazy. There's just does not seem to be that many people that are just crazy in the world about their religion and about politics and things like that. But I think that the children are one of the things that I've enjoyed the most. The children in India were wonderful. I don't know. I've only been one place that I would not want to go back, and that was Nepal. It was beautiful, but it was the filthiest place with the nastiest people I think I've ever seen in my life. I thought I had seen nasty people until I got there.
Would you say that's one of the most cultural shocks you've
It
faced?
really was. You'd be walking down the street and they would spit on you. Just, to live in a country that is so gorgeous and to be that, I don't even know how to put it, just nasty people.
Yeah.
I'm sure they're not all that way. I just happened to run across a few like that.
Yeah.
I've never really been anywhere that was, another memorable experience. We were in the outback in Australia. We were at Uluru. And it's usually dry, really dry there. And that year, it had rained repeatedly, and the desert was in full bloom. And we got to the rainforest, and they'd had a drought, and it was dry. So that was a shock I was not expecting. But to see the desert in full bloom was an amazing experience. Talking to some of the Aborigines, we talked to a man in Australia that was one of the children that they took away from their parents when they were little, and they were raised in schools. And he missed so much of his culture being taken away from his grandparents and his great-grandparents. And talking to him was an experience I'll never forget. What else? I'm sure there are a lot of things that I'll think about tomorrow.
What's it like being a grandparent?
Wonderful.
Wonderful.
I have no complaints whatsoever. I read a bumper sticker years ago that said, "Your grandchildren are the reward for not killing your children." And that's probably very true. You're the one I'm closest to because we were raised down the street from each other. You were raised down the street from me.
Yeah.
And you've always been helpful to me, and you change my light bulbs, and you do things that I cannot do anymore. You take me to the doctor when I can't drive back. But that's just really a wonderful experience. You sort of get to live vicariously through them and watch them grow up.
What was your first reaction when you found out you were going to be a grandparent?
Absolutely thrilled to death. I was somewhere. Gosh, I can't even remember where. I was coming home from somewhere. I don't remember now. Some country. And Chris and Kimberly called me and told me that she was pregnant the day I got home. And then your mother and daddy had you, and then Chris and Kimberly had another little boy. So I have two 20-year-olds and a 22-year-old grandchild. All boys.
Did you ever want a granddaughter?
Oh gosh, yes. I had clothes made and bought a christening gown in Belgium one time. I'm saving it for a great-granddaughter.
What would you say you're most proud of in your life, and what makes you the happiest?
Most proud of?
Yeah.
Mike and Chris and the three of y'all. Knowing that you have raised two worthy individuals who contribute to the world, I think that's probably the best thing I've done in my life. And then they gifted me with the 3 of y'all. So yeah, that's the most important thing I've ever done.
What did you want to be when you grew up? When you were little?
Architect.
An architect?
Mm-hmm.
What made you want to be an architect?
Always enjoyed math and drawing, and always interested in buildings and churches and anything like that. That's just what I always wanted to be.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably the only regret I've got, is that I did not go to college. Mm-hmm. But if I had gone to college, I wouldn't have, like Chris.
Yeah.
So, it's just one of those things you don't regret.
Yeah. What was your first job?
A dime store.
Mm.
It was a dime store in Jackson, and that was my first job, and I really enjoyed it because I like to sew, and I had a great aunt that taught me how to sew and knit and crochet and smock and do all those wonderful handy things. And so I was in heaven working in a dime store, because they sold fabrics and thread and yarn and all sorts of things like that. So that was an enjoyable job.
Mm-hmm. Are there any moments in your life that you wish you could go back to relive and re-experience again?
Most of them.
Most of them?
Yeah, I would like to relive some of them.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to change a few of them, but yes, I would like to relive most of the trips that I've taken. Just watching y'all grow up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to see all that over again.
Mm. What are some things you would recommend avoiding in life?
Being in debt.
Mm-hmm.
That's a hard thing not to do, but that's probably the one thing I would say avoid. Overspending, not living in your means, and
Mm-hmm.
that's probably it.
Yeah.
Don't steal a car or rob a bank or anything like that, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't think any of y'all are going to do that.
No. Who's the most interesting person you ever met, and why?
My daddy.
Why do you say that?
My daddy was one of 11 children. Like I said before, he was born in 1907, and his oldest brother was killed in World War I. So there was a lot of difficulty when my daddy grew up. He grew up in a mill town, and they had very little money and a lot of mouths to feed. They raised their own hogs. They had their own gardens. He lived through the Depression and World War I, and he had to quit school in the 8th grade to help support his family. He said he got a new pair of overalls once a year, right before Christmas, and he got a new pair of shoes every year when it got too cold to go barefoot. He wore those new overalls to church, and the others he wore every day. They would wash them at night in a pot with boiling water with a fire underneath it, hang them up to dry, and if they weren't dry the next morning, you wore them whether they were wet or not. He said he had one white shirt that he wore to church and a couple of shirts that he wore to work. And they didn't have anything. And he worked at the mill for many years, working 67, 80 hours a week. And then he rented a gas station from a man and worked on the weekends. And when he was 29, 28 or 29, he married my mother. And she was from what, quote unquote, a well-to-do family. And my grandparents did not want them to marry. He was 10 years older than her. And they just didn't think he was educated enough, or just didn't think it was a good fit. So my mother's sister that was closest in age to her helped her climb out a window one night, and they rode to Atlanta in a borrowed car and got married. And he was the one that did well and looked after my grandmother until the day she died. So he was the one that was more successful than the rest of them. So, and he worked hard all of his life, and he wanted good things for my mother and for my sister and I, and he did. He gave me a car when I was 16, my dream car, a 1964 Impala Supersport. And my sister wanted a convertible, so that's what she got when she turned 18, or 16, excuse me. So he was my hero.
Yeah.
He really was. He worked hard all of his life. He died when he was 89 on his way to work. He retired every January the 1st for the last 20 years of his life, and went back to work on February the 1st every year. He could not stay retired. He had to work. But I guess he taught me most everything I know. I hope you can cut some of this out with me crying. Brings up a lot of stuff, a lot of memories.
You lived through a lot of historical events. What would you say has been the biggest historical event throughout your lifetime?
I think the thing that worried me the most was the conflict with Russia, or the Soviet Union at the time. That was always a big problem. I was a junior in high school when Kennedy was assassinated. That was just awful.
Yeah.
Cannot explain how awful that was. Oh, what else? Stock market's crashing, and Black Friday, or whatever they call it, Black Tuesday, I'm not sure what it is anymore. Just a lot of financial concerns, and I don't know. I guess that the Challenger thing, that was a horrible thing. 9/11 was just awful. Those are some of the things that stick out, that are hard things to live through.
Where you were on 9/11?
Oh yeah.
Where were you?
Watching the Today Show, and I remember Matt Lauer going, "What was that?" And he had one of the screens that was in the studio. He had seen one of the planes flying into the tower. And immediately it was up on the screen, and so we watched all that for days, and then saw the plane fly into the second tower. But I was at home. Kennedy, I was in history class, and the principal came up with a speaker and said, all the juniors and seniors adjourned to the library immediately. And we had one little 13, 14-inch black and white television in the library. And the junior and senior class, that was all the library would hold. And we watched all of that take place. Challenger, I was in the kitchen listening on the television in the next room, and heard somebody say something, and I thought, what? And went flying in there, and of course that's when all that took place. Just, you know, I don't know. I think that's probably some of the worst things I've witnessed.
What was it like seeing men step foot on the moon for the first time?
It was amazing. My brother-in-law worked for NASA. He was on Winter von Braun's staff and worked on the Redstone and then worked on Saturn V. And Michael is a small child. He was born in '66, so he was only 3 years old. Mm-hmm. And Matt could explain everything that was going to happen to him. He knew everything that was going to take place on the moon landing, from the time it started until the time they got back home. Mm-hmm. And I remember sitting there watching it on the television with him. And I said, locks. They keep talking about locks. Michael locks his fish. And he turned around and looked at me. He says, Mother, liquid oxygen. Turned back around and watched the rest of it on the television. 3 years old. So he hadn't changed much.
No.
He still loves anything to do with space. Mm-hmm. But that was some experience.
Yeah. With the holidays coming up, do you have any memorable Christmas stories or?
Christmas was totally different when I grew up than it is now. The biggest Christmas I remember having was, I think I was 5. A friend of my mother's and sister's Cocker Spaniel had puppies. And she gave me a Cocker Spaniel puppy, and I got a Hopalong Cassidy outfit. Hat, gloves, pants, shirt, guns, the whole 9 yards. Mm-hmm. And that was my entire Christmas. And I thought it was one of the best Christmas anybody could possibly have. And now Christmas is so different. Mm. It's not the same thing. Everybody tries to spend as much money as they can sometimes, I think, to try and make their children happy. Yeah. And I think just being with your family is probably what makes you happy. Yeah.
What would you say is the most rewarding part of being a grandparent?
Oh. Watching y'all become adults and wondering what you're going to do with your life. It's very little about being a grandparent that's not rewarding. Mm-hmm. I think that's probably it. Mm.
Have there ever been any challenging aspects of being a grandparent?
Yeah. Biting your tongue. When you think your child and his spouse are making a mistake. Yeah. But that's pretty much it. Just keep your mouth shut.
Is there anything you regret not doing, or the wish you could go back and change how you did something?
I'm sure there's a lot of things I wish I had gone and done differently. Mm-hmm. Things I wish I had bought that I didn't buy, and things that I bought that I wished I hadn't. Yeah. We had a silver anniversary bet. I regretted that from the day we bought it till the day we got rid of it. As my daddy said, it was the best day of my life, and the next second best was the day we got rid of it. Regretted not having a college degree, but I wouldn't change it because it would change the life that I have and the family that I have. It would have been totally different. So it's not really a regret. Mm-hmm.
Do you have any fond memories of your grandparents, or?
Oh yeah, lots of them.
What would you say is the most memorable of them?
Just what I was talking about my granddaddy earlier. Just being with him, learning how to drive going into the pasture with him, working in the garden with him. They lived up the street from us, and I could run up there anytime I wanted to. He raised cattle. He was a builder, but cattle was his pastime. And he used to take myself and my 2 boy cousins that lived on the other end of the house from him, or the other end of the street. He would take us out in the pasture and talk to us and help us build things. And he had a Hereford bull whose name was Pat. And he would throw the 3 of us up on the bull's back, and the bull would follow my granddaddy all around the pasture with us riding on him. Just, he died when I was 10 years old. Which was very difficult. My grandmother lived a good while longer. And I spent an awful lot of time with her. She was afraid to stay in the house by herself, so I walked up the street every night, and we played cards and games together, and I spent the night with her, and then I would walk home the next morning and get ready to go to school. I did that until I was 16, from the time I was 10. So I spent a lot of time with both of them. My other grandparents, my daddy was 40 years old when I was born, so his mother and daddy, his daddy was already dead, and his mother died when I was maybe 3 or 4 years old. So I really don't have a lot of memory with them.
If there's anything you could tell the world, what would you tell them?
Stop fighting. Be tolerant. Don't guess it'll ever happen, but that would be what I would like most for the world to do is to learn to tolerate each other. Is there anything else?
You got any more stories you want to tell you've never told before?
I'm sure there's plenty of them. I'm not sure some of them I could tell. Some of the places I've visited, the Galapagos Islands. I would highly recommend anybody doing that. At night, you lay on top of the boats that you go in on. They give very few licenses, and the whole time we were there, we were in the Galapagos for 5 days, and we never saw but 2 other boats. And you lay up on top of the boat at night and watch the Milky Way. There's no light pollution whatsoever, and you can see the universe. Nothing in the Galapagos is afraid of you. The birds land on your head and pick hairs out of your head. The tortoises sort of walk up to you and stare. The iguanas do the same thing. Everything that's there is not afraid of you. You get in the water and the animals play with you. I had a seal that would not leave me alone. It would swim around me and bump up against me and stick its nose in my face mask and just, want to play with you. Oh, what else? The Amazon. I went swimming with piranha. Learned that most of what you know about piranha is Hollywood hype. And as long as you're not bleeding, they don't bother you. Oh, what else? In Alaska, we was there during the salmon run, and was probably within 50 feet of 30, 40, 50 bears. They've eaten so much, they just sort of lay there and stare. They have nothing would they come get you or, cross 2 feet of water to get to you. I don't know, what else? flew around Denali in a helicopter around the top of it.
Mm.
That was an experience. It was an avalanche.
You've been to plenty of Georgia football games all throughout the country.
Lots of Georgia football games, yeah.
What would you say is the most memorable experience you've had at a Georgia football game?
The 1980 championship in New Orleans.
Mm-hmm.
Our tickets were on the 50-yard line. President Carter was sitting directly above us. Yeah, lots of Georgia football games. Wish I could still go, but I can't.
Yeah.
But that was probably the most memorable.
Yeah.
A lot of close calls.
Yeah.
Kevin Butler's long field goal. Still remember the big sign that flashed up on the screen, Hot Toe Mighty. And listening to what's his face on the radio at the same time, Larry Munson, he just went absolutely ballistic. He cut the transmission off. I think he unhooked the wires when he jumped up out of his chair. You could hear his chair hit the floor, and then everything went dead for a while. Oh, I know lots of things.
Mm-hmm.
I've lived a wonderful life. I've had some hard times, and like everybody, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. Oh, let's see if I made any other notes here. Oh, the Amazon, the pink porpoise. They would swim next to the little boat. We were traveling on the Amazon, and they would come right up to the boat and swim right next to you, and you could reach out and touch them.
Well, that's all the questions I have. If you have any closing remarks you'd like to make?
No, I think I've pretty much said it all, I think.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you doing this. It's been a fun interview.
Well, I was glad to do it. I'm sorry I cried so much.
Oh, it's all right.
Brings up a lot of memories.
Yeah.